الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Here we are. We're going to go over another clip of Mubarik Gilani and just point out the falsehood that they're not showing you in these little clips that they're putting out of his teachings. So this one is titled The Unparalleled Status of Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So let's go through the quick video.
He is the one who gives life and death. Now, he may delegate his power to anybody. You understand? And he delegates the power of giving life to Jesus, son of Mary. And he gave life.
I'm going to speed through this a little bit because
that we understand.
I'm just showing this just so you can show that it's the correct transcription.
Right? Nobody can deny that Jesus raised dead and made from the clay living birds. He did that based on the law, right? So he had this authority and power from Allah to raise the dead, make blind whole. But the Prophet said, the whole last was a postman who delivered a message and went away. He had nothing in his power to do anything. And he said, oh, so and so, I cannot even save myself. There's nothing in my hand I can do. So, on one hand, the person who was sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to tell the world, that great messenger, of whom Allah created everything, is about to appear. Prepare the way for him. He's so great that I am not fit to tie the list of his shoes. His name is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now they tell us, these enemies of Banu Hashim and Ahlul Bayt, the jealous, they say, he had nothing in his hand, he couldn't do any good to him, he couldn't do any harm to anybody. But here, Jesus, Isa alayhi salam, Ibn Maryam, he is saying that Allah delegated his power. The most important and most powerful power is to raise dead and give, raise dead and also give life. Both powers he gave him. And he does give this power to the Messenger. And he does give this power to the wali's. If you bent upon denying these things, then you may find some other way, find some other book.
So we just heard him, and it was probably too fast, but they had subtitles. You can go check the video out yourselves. But just to summarize up what he's saying, he's basically saying that Allah delegated the power to Isa alayhi salam to revive the dead, right? Give life, revive the dead. And he also gives his powers to his walis. But you will not see any examples of, Allah knows best, that I know of anything from the Quran and Sunnah that shows that anybody else was raising the dead. This was a miracle that was given to Isa alayhi salam as one of his miracles of being a prophet. And to say that Allah gives his power to his walis is an extraordinary claim. And to actually kind of equate the miracles of the prophets to powers that they possess is wrong. Like, for instance, the miracle of the Holy Quran is what was sent with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's not a power that he is given, as if this is like some kind of like Marvel's universe where people have powers to like do things. Nothing happens without the will of Allah. So that's just his quote. They try to, some kind of motivational thing, but again, they forget to put out the other stuff that he says in this lecture. This lecture is called, they call it the Triple T discourse, where he allegedly teaches about Tawheed, Tawakkul, and Taqwa, the Triple T's. But let's just talk about a few things. So he starts off the discourse quoting what he says, the Holy Last Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said, I'll zoom it in a little bit. He says the Holy Last Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said that, I'll just do the translation, whoever knows and understands himself will know his Rabb. And he says this is what Rasulullah said. So he falsely attributes this saying to Rasulullah, because Rasulullah did not say this. This is actually an Arabic proverb that it's not a hadith. So right there, he misquotes Rasulullah, and this is something he constantly does. And you'll notice that whenever Mubarak Gilani quotes anything, he never gives any reference to anything. He just says stuff. And this is a clear sign that of someone that is not learned, that is not a scholar, that does not have Islamic knowledge. Here he says, if when you see other people and feel inferior and say, yes, sir, act like you are their servant, you act like they're your servant, or you're their maid, and you're afraid that if you annoy them, they will be harsh on you and something will happen to you, then you have committed shirk. This is the way of the people who belong to Allah. So basically he's saying that if you are subservient to somebody, if you act like their maid or servant, as many people who traveled over to Pakistan were simply maids and servant to Mubarak Gilani and his family, and continue to do so. He's saying that this is actually shirk. Meanwhile, he accepted this type of servitude and maids and servants from his followers for 40 plus years, and his family continues to do this. Here, this is another sign. This is he quotes the ayat where Rasulullah Allah gave the miracle with Rasulullah through the dust, and the dust at the battle basically blinded all the disbelievers in the battle, and the Muslims gained the upper hand. And in the ayah, Allah says, "And you threw not, O Muhammad, so when you threw it, but it was Allah who threw." And this is a classic misinterpretation. This is like, whenever you read this, you can go through the tafsirs, you can go through anything and see if the explanation that Mubarak Gilani is given actually matches the explanation given by the scholars of Islam since the time of Rasulullah. So Rasulullah didn't even explain it this way. He actually explains it, and he gives the hadith that's in, you can find the hadith in the 40 hadith in Nawawi, where Rasulullah says, a person that does so much dhikr and remembrance and prayer and all this, and then, it's a well-known hadith that's used by these people that commingle creation with Allah, where Allah says, it's a hadith Qudsi, where Allah says, the person, I become the person which he sees, which he hears, which he does things, right? And he interprets it, which is a totally wrong interpretation, that Allah actually physically or actually becomes these people's senses or these people's actions, where they actually represent perfectly Allah's will, which no scholar, authentic scholar that's attached to the Quran and Sunnah, that's attached to Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, actually has interpreted this hadith this way. Rasulullah didn't explain this hadith this way, the Sahabas didn't understand this hadith this way, so on and so forth. So this is, and you can look this up yourselves, but it's just another clear sign that he has no idea what he's talking about, because that concept that he explains actually is shirk. And you can see the culmination of his shirk, because he actually ends the explanation with a statement of clear shirk, because he says Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the manifestation of the person of Allah. I'm going to repeat that. He says Muhammad is the manifestation of the person of Allah. Astaghfirullah. May Allah protect us from this. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is not the manifestation of the person of Allah. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as he has said in authentic hadiths, I am but a man, right? Even in the Quran, Allah says this. And then he says, nowhere before or after has this happened. So he's basically, this goes into the whole seven sultan beliefs, this whole mumbo jumbo of Allah actually coming in like human form, like the human representation of Allah. And he's clearly saying right here that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is that human representation of Allah, which this is not in accordance to any Islamic belief. He also says, and this is a very interesting thing about this discourse, his name Tawheed, Tawakkul, and Taqwa, right? He mentions Tawheed only in three instances in this whole discourse. And we're going to cover them because he doesn't explain Tawheed correctly, which shows like very clearly, like the one thing that if you wanted to boil Islam down to one thing, it would be Tawheed, right? It would be Tawheed. And he doesn't explain Tawheed. And when he does attempt to explain Tawheed, he's like way off base. Like, for instance, he says the first lesson is Tawheed, right? So this is the first lesson, he says. And he says, Allah being close to us is called Tawheed. That is not what Tawheed is. Allah being close to us, Allah always seeing what we're doing and having knowledge of everything, right? This is not Tawheed. Tawheed is the oneness of Allah. Qul huwallahu ahad, right? So it's Ikhlas. That's the surah of Tawheed. Allah is one. He doesn't mention this surah at all, or even the ayah at all relating to Allah's oneness. Tawheed, right? Allah being close to us is called Tawheed. This is what he calls Tawheed, right? Just this is not Islamic teachings. And he says, they say, right? They say, whoever they are, fear Allah. Then he says, why should we fear Allah? He is our only help, our only companion, and the one who loves us. We should love him. One doesn't fear the one whom they love. So he's saying that you should not fear Allah, right? Even though Allah tells us in the Holy Quran, right, that we should fear him. And again, a lot of things with Mubarak Gilani, if you actually studied his teachings, you'll see that he not only contradicts the understood teachings, the accepted teachings of Islam, that he contradicts himself. Often he contradicts himself within the same actual lecture. And I'll show you how he does that here. So he says here that we should not fear Allah, right? But if we go to the Holy Quran, Allah says in Ali Imran, 175th ayat, that he says, that is only Satan who frightens you of his supporters. So fear them not, but fear me, if you are indeed believers. Khafun, right? Khafun, that means fear. Khaf is fear. He's saying, don't fear them, fear me. And we all know about the well-known quote by Mubarak Gilani, where he actually told his followers that if you don't fear Allah, then fear me, right? So here he's instructing his followers not to fear Allah. We should live as Muslims between fear and hope. This is what we're supposed to do as Muslims. But him, again, contradicting Rasulullah, contradicting Allah, saying that we shouldn't fear Allah, right? Sounds good, but this is not in accordance to Islamic teachings. Then we go on. He says, there's one more example I'll give you. I already told you, but I want to include it here. He tells this whole lengthy story, right, about some guy, some Sahaba allegedly, like digging up some lady and basically committing necrophilia, right? And then that Allah said that he's gonna forgive him. I couldn't find this hadith anywhere, not anywhere. Most likely a fabrication, but this is, again, when people are scholarly people who are teachers, like, they give references. Like, you could find this hadith in Bukhari, the Musnad Ahmed, or Tirmidhi, or whatever it is. They'll give a reference to where the hadith comes. It's just a story that he probably just got from some rando book. Allah knows best. But again, this is just another sign of, the non-squat. He's not a scholar. Then, like I said, within the same lecture, he contradicts himself, because then he says, Allah says, he actually quotes the ayat, or one of the ayats, that he says, Allah said, fear me, do not fear them. But just above, earlier, a few minutes ago in the lecture, he says, don't fear Allah. Contradicts himself, right? Constantly does this. But people don't pay attention because people actually don't study what he says. They try, just like these videos, they try to grab little snippets of stuff that'll be like motivating or stuff that they gravitate to, and then they pay attention to that. They actually don't study his lectures or try to learn from him and try to implement his thing. Because if you actually did study his stuff, you'll realize, like, oh, this guy is full of crap and he doesn't know what he's talking about, and he's constantly contradicting himself. Not only does he contradict himself, he contradicts Allah and contradicts Rasulullah. Again, another contradiction. He goes to this whole thing about, he says, after knowing this, why would you fear anybody else or somebody else? If you do not, if you do, then what should we call you? He says, Ghazal Azam, Sheikh Abdul Qadir Gilani, rahimullah, said that this person becomes a mushrik. This is Tawheed. This is called Tawheed of the Awliya. The people who follow Tawheed are called Muhammadi. The person that fears somebody else other than Allah has committed shirk. So again, this is one of the instances where he tries to explain Tawheed, and he says Tawheed is basically only fearing Allah, right? What that is not how the scholars explain what Tawheed is, okay? And then he says that, fearing anybody other than Allah is shirk. But again, go right back to it. We're always going to mention this, when he told his followers that if you don't fear Allah, then fear me. So he's calling his followers to what he says is shirk. All these times, and that's like the end, but all these things, the discourse called Tawheed, Tawakkul, and Taqwa, he doesn't actually even explain Tawheed. He contradicts Allah. He contradicts Rasulullah. He also contradicts himself, and he quotes fabricated hadiths. So this is the stuff that they don't show you. Again, don't be fooled by the little clips that they put out there. Mubarak Gilani was a fraud. His teachings were deviant, and his followers are continuing upon that path. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.